I thought today I would do something a little bit different, and possibly in tomorrow's video as well, maybe a bit reflective. And I appreciate that this is not necessarily going to attract very many viewers to the channel as I talk about this. But the one thing I wanted to talk about, I suppose, is why do I do this? Why do I talk out relentlessly? And I suppose in a way I'm trying to address those people who are not really interested in conspiracy theories, don't necessarily believe that anything is going on, still feel that although the government themselves are probably corrupt and full of self-interest, overall are doing an okay job and generally have the country's best nature at heart. Otherwise, why would they go into it, and why would they bother to go through all the machinations and the various procedures that one has to go through? And surely it can't be as bad or as conspiratorial with a one world government and these people in dark rooms that nobody knows who they are. How can that possibly even be a thing? These are the sort of people that I want to really address in today's monologue, which probably is not my audience at all. And so I don't expect people to watch this because they'll be thinking, well, you know, we know why we're watching you and we know why you do what you do. So that said, this is the sort of video, I suppose, that I would like to show to my son. My eldest son is 33 years old. And right at the beginning, when I started to talk about these things and switched from the bald explorer stuff that I was doing, the landscape, heritage and nature, which if you look at my back catalogue from, say, 2 years ago, was pretty much all I was doing, is exploring this country, England, and I'm an Englishman. And I was going around the churches, I was looking at nature, I was looking at farming, I was looking at the landscape, at the geology. That I was traveling around. I mean, you know, I'm not terribly educated. I read books as much as I can. I left school at 15. So what do I know about anything other than I've been around and I've seen the changes? And in that time, I was noticing those changes in England that didn't seem to sit well with me. The new builds that were going in everywhere. We kept continually being told that we were having to have housing, and yet the houses that were developed were not terribly aesthetic. They had small gardens, mean windows, came in overnight, basically had very little amenities, didn't have a shop or doctor's surgery or a school in them, but you'd have anything from 500 to 2,000 houses suddenly go up on prime farmland. And that seemed to me to be unusual and strange, and really was the demand that big? And yet, of course, we would see the amount of immigration happening and increasing, and government's policy on that, and their sort of ineptitude to be able to stop it, or their impotency to be able to prevent people from coming in, as if we were unable to guard our own island from people coming in. And yet we managed during the Second World War, and we were all prepared to repel invaders back then. But anyway, so I was doing that, and I thought to myself, there is something intrinsically wrong. Of course, we went through the pandemic and then the rollout of the medical intervention, which now seems to be blatantly obvious to most of us that it is causing problems. And yet there is a huge amount of ordinary, everyday people who have been so blinded and had the propaganda put over them that they cannot see it, even though they may have had some medical issues themselves, and yet they go back for another booster and they cannot make the connection because somewhere, somehow in their heads, the idea, the concept that a government would be not working for them, that they would mandate something which was likely to cause damage to them, cannot enter their mind. They cannot make that connection. And this, for me, is very difficult. But for my son, if I was making this video for my son, he equally is unable to accept it. And that is, I suppose, why I continually do what I do, because it just seems very strange that people are not able to see things the same way that I see things. Now, I'm not asking people to completely agree with me, by no means. I'm not asking people to accept what I say without them doing their own due diligence. I don't want any power. I don't want to get into government. I don't want to lead people in a different way. I don't want to run an assembly. I don't want to run a group and dictate to people how they should see things. I don't want people necessarily to accept everything that I say, but to have an open mind, just to be able to question things, to be able to say, hang on a minute, is what we're being told correct? And to engage critical thinking and common sense. Common sense, surely, during the pandemic, would have said that at the speed of science, a new medicine untested on humans, this new technology, whatever the bloody thing is something that has never been tested and is new. We're going to roll it out on the whole population, despite the fact that there are on-the-shelf medicines that have been around for donkey's years, that have they're out of patent, which means they could be cheaply manufactured and they're not harmful. And we could roll it out, and it really does help against this particular so-called virus that was running around. And that seems like a logical step, but why would you introduce something that had not been tested and then force the entire population to have it, including pregnant women, by a government mandate? I mean, the choice should always be the individual, and yet the amount of pressure we saw was like never before. Politicians ramming it down our throats, and then on social media and of course mainstream media, people telling us that we were complete idiots if we didn't take something that had been not tested. We had no idea what the after effects might be, and the people who are manufacturing it apparently have no liability if things went wrong. I mean, you know, that's where I say surely common sense should have been engaged. And that's where I'm worrying with my son, who has a very intelligent head, went to university, knew what was happening in the world, running his own business. And yet there was still an element that he would shut down the argument. I won't listen to it. It's rubbish. It's rubbish. He said to me in the early stages that there's a lot of money to be made out of conspiracy theories. Fleece them for as much as you can. Now, that attitude is most surprising to me, because I say I'm calling this video, why am I doing what I do? It's certainly not about the money. What I have learnt about money, let's say, is that money will take care of itself. It depends on you, your attitude, your spirituality, your integrity, your morals, and a whole load of other things. It's a completely separate issue to deliberately trying to tell people wrong truths, misinformation, and then try and extract money out of it. I don't, in my interviews that I do, you may have noticed, I don't put adverts in the middle. I don't. I put top and tail adverts because Google will put them on anyway if I don't claim what small reward you get for doing that. And I don't put adverts in the middle. I don't try to fleece anybody, or it's never been about that. For me, I am a bit of a all or nothing. So once I realized there was an appetite and people were actually open to listen to my thoughts, my views, and then my interviews, it became, this is what needs to be done. It seemed an urgent and important thing to do. People don't have to listen. They don't have to believe me. They can just quietly say, as many probably do, it's a load of old hogwash, I don't believe in him. But why I do it is because I genuinely 100% believe what I have learned, what I have been told, not necessarily all of it. I do believe that we have had infiltrated into our legal system, into our government system, into our police system, into our teaching system, and into our border control, and into our cultural system, dark forces, a rogue element that is trying to control the narrative and persuade us and push us, cajole us in one direction and not allow us to question. And again, we saw that during the pandemic when there were a bunch of very eminent scientists and doctors who said, we've come together to form the Barrington Declaration. We challenge the government's point of view of the science that they have been presented. Now, any government who is there at the behest of the people, responsible to those people, ought to have said, okay, well, we will listen to that. We will debate it. We will give airtime to this. In a national crisis or a global crisis, we will give airtime to people who have a dissenting or alternative point of view. Let's see your argument. Let's see if there is any evidence. If there's a chance that we've got it wrong, that you're locking people down and injecting them with something that apparently has been made out of the speed of science, if we've got that wrong, then we ought to be discussing that openly, transparently and fairly. And of course we saw that that didn't happen. And so because these things were rammed down us, that is one of the reasons I felt and continue to feel that it's important. But it isn't just that small things on a national scale are happening. This seems to be on a much more global scale. And once I learned about the World Economic Forum, the Club of Rome, and the Vatican, and all of their different roles, the Bilateral Commission, all of these various bodies who have been unelected, unaccountable, and who are controlling our interests. They control the narrative, they control the money, they are wanting to control our health. They're pushing us ever more into this digital world. And with them are the big corporations who have been buying up all the small little businesses and new ideas and keeping us in this narrow band in which here we are in the 21st century working like Billy-O to try and pay mortgages, to pay bills, to pay tax. And actually we discover that outside of that narrow band are extremely useful ideas, wholesome ways of approaching, say, health, teaching, energy, that we are constantly, no, you can't have that. There is only this direction that we're pushing you in, and evermore we're being persuaded into a direction which seems to me to be extremely unhealthy and not useful. And you only have to look, here we are in the 21st century, in which the policies that are being handed down to us are anti-human. They seem to be against us. The people in charge in all avenues, the teachers at school seem to be against the very pupils, making them into sexual creatures. The teachers themselves carrying out the work, fearful that they cannot go against or challenge it, and have been brainwashed themselves to teach 4, 5, 6-year-olds extremely undesirable sexual pleasures or practices, I should say, when they're not old enough to understand the nature of their bodies. Their brains have not developed sufficiently. We see the same agendas being pushed in the police system. The police who would take an oath to serve king and country, but are there for the common good of man, to help, seem very much part of a corporation to fleece the public out of as much money as possible. And we see that with all their entrapments, with the speed cameras on the gantries, with the police engaging with bailiffs and enforcement officers and the courts, that they seem to shy away from actual policing and are much more interested or have been coerced into going down thought police, policing what people say on social media. And we've seen copious amounts of evidence about all of that. We also see the same strange idea of alienating people and pushing people against one another in the cultural aspect of our country, putting where we never used to have a race problem. We'd sort of got over that in the 60s and 70s. And now suddenly we have not only race, but we have sexual issues about gender and these minority groups where mostly the people actually, the nice, decent, everyday people who are in those minority groups are going, oh my God, they've turned what was a very minor thing that we're quite happy to get along with the main society into a huge issue. And it's usually the people who are not in the minority group who are pushing the agendas of the minority groups so that they have to be on an equal par with the majority of people. So that now we see the nonsense that's going on with the gender issue, where the white middle-class man has been eliminated from any television commercial and TV sitcoms, is not reflected in society, where certain races or colours of skin are skewed in the media and mainstream and are being talked about as if that is actually a reflection of the country. And we know it isn't. Lies and history we've seen being rewritten and changed to suit a certain agenda, and certain elements of our history, and we know history is, of course, it's his story, it's written by the victors, which gives a very biased idea, but we've discovered that actually much of our history that has been taught in school, that we have learned and taken as read, is not actually correct at all, and that the truth has been obscured. We see this pushing us into the narrow band in many different ways, and of course we know about the digital path that we're all being pushed into, that get rid of cash, get rid of a private transaction so that I can buy from somebody something that nobody else need know about. It's none of their business. Not that I've got anything to hide about, but it's just between me and the person I'm buying from. And yet, no, the government would like to put into place a currency, a CBDC, a central bank digital currency that is programmable and therefore by default could be used. And I'm not necessarily saying it will be, but it has that potential to be used, that it can be monitored and it can be interfered with, and your purchases can be prevented. We've seen the digital money thing go berserk, making people appear that it's very useful, it saves us carrying loose change so that we can pay for things on our phones, which we now discover are listening devices, listening to us, copying our data. Everything is being pushed so drastically fast so that we have a virtual existence rather than a real existence and a private existence. We discover, of course, that some of this technology that we're entering into our homes with Wi-Fi, smart meters, and these lollipops which keep sticking up, these 5G masts that are supposedly transmitting 5G signals, or will be, that phones, it seems, don't even have the 5G chips inside them. They set 5G ready. We haven't got them in. We don't necessarily need them. And again, we're moving at the speed of science, the speed of light, to have a technology that has yet to be fully tested, and actually, when is tested, is shown to be dangerous to humans, to animals, to insects, to plants, to other species, to life, with the high frequencies they wish to use. And when examined further, we see that the companies are using fraudulent companies that are not registered on Companies House, and that there is a question about who is liable should this technology cause people harm, and yet it's being thrust down at us. And once again, the government are not prepared to listen. And finally, I mean, I could go on and on and on, and I don't want to go on and on. We've seen that 100 years ago, when democracy was challenged, that democracy, if democracy is the best of a bad bunch of ways of running things, ought to run along the way that the people put proposals up in their locality, in their areas, to say, this is the sort of thing we want, this is the sort of stuff we need for our area. It's unique to perhaps 50, 100 miles down the road where they're next to a river and they have slightly different needs. We're by the sea, or we're landlocked, or we have mountains, or we have this style of farming and industry, or these kind of customs. This is the type of things that we want and we'd like to continue in this area. And that sort of local level of government in which every area has its own specific needs is totally and utterly ignored. This one size fits all. But democracy should be allowing those people in their areas to go to their representative of government and say, these are our specific proposals and needs. Now take that to the executive in the House of Commons and say, your job that we pay you to do is to provide the services and the products that we need in order to thrive. We're too busy having a life. We pay you to do this job. That's your job as a government. And that's what should happen. That's how democracy should work. But we have seen that we are being told what we have, and if we question it, somehow we're outcast, or we're called conspiracy theorists. This is the kind of conversation that I would like to have had with my son, but he won't entertain these ideas because he'll just say, no, I've done the fact checking and it seems you're wrong, and that's it. And yet he does, like so many other people, have to just simply look up. And although he's only in his early 30s, he's been around long enough to know that the spring and the summer skies do not look the way they do now. That's not that's not man-made global warming in the sense that has been told to us. That is man-made sky manipulation by planes pushing out into the sky poisons which seem to be there to affect us and the plants and create a great famine so that farmers will die and therefore we will have no food. But you only have to look up and say, actually, do you know, if I'm honest with myself, these skies are very different. Somehow this common sense, this critical thinking has been wiped out. And that's why I do what I do.